There's something happening tonight that most Americans don't even know about yet, and it matters more than you might think. At midnight, the United States Supreme Court building was cleared. Every person inside was escorted out. The doors were locked. Security was repositioned. The building went dark in a way it hasn't in recent memory outside of scheduled closures or known threats. But here's what makes this different. There was no public announcement, no press release, no explanation offered to the media or the public about why the highest court in the land suddenly needed to be emptied and secured in the middle of the night. Now, before we go further, let me be clear about what we know and what we don't. We know the building was cleared. We know security protocols were activated. We know this happened at midnight. What we don't know yet is why. And that uncertainty, that information gap, is precisely what we need to examine. Because in Washington, when something happens without explanation, that's often when the most important things are actually taking place. The Supreme Court is not just any building. It's not a museum that closes at 5. It operates continuously. Staff work late. Clerks burn the midnight oil on major cases. Security is always present. The building has its own rhythms, its own patterns of activity that reflect the weight of the work being done inside. So when that pattern breaks, when something disrupts the normal flow, experienced observers pay attention. Let's walk through what a midnight clearing actually means in practical terms. It means every clerk was told to leave, every justice's staff member, every security officer not essential to the lockdown itself, anyone working late on briefs or opinions or case preparation, they all had to go. That doesn't happen casually. That happens when there's a specific reason, a threat assessment, a security concern, an investigation, or something else entirely that requires the building to be secured beyond normal protocols. Now, the Supreme Court has enhanced security. It always has, but it became even more pronounced after the Dobbs decision leaked in 2022, after protests at justices' homes, after credible threats against members of the court. The security apparatus around the Supreme Court expanded significantly. But even with that expanded security, routine operations continue. People work, the building functions, life goes on inside those marble walls, until it doesn't. Here's what makes this moment particularly significant. We're at a point in American political and legal history where the Supreme Court sits at the center of enormous constitutional questions. Questions about presidential immunity, questions about executive power, questions about the limits of federal authority, questions that will shape American governance for generations. The court is not operating in a vacuum. It's operating in an environment of intense political pressure, public scrutiny, and yes, genuine security concerns. So when the building gets cleared at midnight, the question isn't just what happened, the question is what might be coming. Let me give you some context that matters here. In the past few years, we've seen unprecedented events around the Supreme Court. We saw the leak of a draft opinion, something that had never happened in modern history. We saw organized protests that led to the arrest of individuals near justices' homes. We saw a man arrested near Justice Kavanaugh's residence with weapons and zip ties. These are not normal times for the court, and the people responsible for its security know that. Now, there are several plausible scenarios that could explain a midnight clearing. Let's go through them because understanding the possibilities helps us understand what we should be watching for next. First scenario, a specific credible threat. Perhaps intelligence services picked up chatter. Perhaps the FBI or Capitol Police received information suggesting an imminent danger to the building or to personnel inside. In that case, a clearing makes perfect sense. Get everyone out, secure the perimeter, assess the threat. That's textbook security protocol. Second scenario, an investigation. If there's reason to believe something happened inside the building, whether it's a breach of classified information, another potential leak, or some other internal matter, you'd want to secure the building, preserve evidence, and control access. That would require clearing non-essential personnel immediately. Third scenario, emergency preparation related to an upcoming decision or announcement. If the court is about to release an opinion that's expected to generate significant public reaction, security might decide to test protocols, rehearse responses, or pre-position resources. A midnight clearing could be part of that preparation. Fourth scenario, something we haven't thought of yet, something specific to this moment, this set of cases, this political environment, something that will only make sense when we have more information. The challenge is that the Supreme Court, by design and tradition, does not explain itself to the public in real time. The justices speak through their opinions. The institution communicates through formal channels on its own timeline. Transparency is not its strong suit, and in matters of security, that's often justified. But here's where it gets complicated. The Supreme Court doesn't just belong to the justices. It doesn't just belong to the legal community. It belongs to the American people. It derives its authority from public trust and constitutional legitimacy. And when something unusual happens, when the building gets locked down in the middle of the night without explanation, that trust becomes relevant. People have a right to know if there's a threat to the court. They have a right to understand if something is compromising the integrity of the institution. Not every operational detail, not every security measure, but the basic contours of what's happening and why. Because here's the thing about secrecy in a democracy. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it protects legitimate interests, but sometimes it covers up problems that the public needs to know about. And distinguishing between those situations requires judgment, transparency, and accountability. Think about what we're facing right now as a country. We have a Supreme Court that just heard arguments about presidential immunity that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in our system. We have justices facing questions about their financial disclosures, their relationships with wealthy donors, their impartiality on cases involving people they have personal connections to. We have ongoing debates about court reform, about expansion, about term limits. The court is under scrutiny from all sides. Conservatives worry about activism. Liberals worry about ideology overriding precedent. Everyone worries about legitimacy. And into that environment comes a midnight clearing. No explanation, just locked doors and enhanced security. You can see why people are asking questions. Now let's talk about what happens next, because that's what really matters. In the coming hours and days, we should expect some form of official statement, maybe from the Marshal of the Supreme Court, who oversees security, maybe from the court's Public Information Office, maybe, though less likely, from the court itself in some formal capacity. That statement will tell us a lot, not just by what it says, but by what it doesn't say, by how quickly it comes, by how detailed it is, by whether it feels transparent or evasive. If this was a routine security drill, you'd expect a straightforward statement saying exactly that. If it was a response to a specific threat that's been resolved, you might get confirmation without details. If it's part of an ongoing investigation or an unresolved situation, you might get very little at all. Pay attention to the words that get used. Out of an abundance of caution suggests precautionary measures. In response to information received suggests a specific threat. Standard security protocols suggest routine operations. The language matters. Also pay attention to what other agencies say or don't say. Does the FBI comment? Does Capitol Police? Does Homeland Security? Or is everyone staying silent? Coordinated silence often means something significant is still developing. Here's another angle worth considering. We're in an era where information moves fast, where leaks happen, where people inside institutions talk to reporters. If this clearing was truly routine, we'd probably already have anonymous sources explaining it. The fact that we don't, the fact that there's still uncertainty, suggests this might be more sensitive than a standard security matter. But let's also be careful not to speculate beyond what the evidence supports. We don't know of any specific plot. We don't know of any breach. We don't know of any immediate danger. What we know is that something unusual happened, and we're waiting for an explanation. That's responsible analysis. Facts first, context second, implications third. Speculation held in check. What this incident does highlight, regardless of the specific cause, is the vulnerability of our institutions. The Supreme Court is supposed to be above politics, insulated from pressure, protected by its constitutional role. But it's also a physical place with human beings working inside it. It exists in the real world, subject to real threats and real challenges. And increasingly, those threats are not hypothetical, they're actual. People have shown up at justices' homes. People have made credible threats. The political temperature around the court has risen to levels we haven't seen in decades. That has consequences. It affects how the court operates. It affects how justices think about their safety and the safety of their families. It affects the willingness of qualified people to serve. It affects public perception of the institution. None of that is healthy for a democracy. Courts need to be able to function without fear. Judges need to be able to rule based on law and conscience, not based on concerns about physical safety. The moment those concerns become paramount, the moment security dictates operations, we've lost something essential. So whether this midnight clearing was a response to a genuine threat or a precautionary measure or something else entirely, it's a reminder that we're operating in a different environment now. The norms and assumptions that governed the court for most of American history don't fully apply anymore. That's not a political statement, that's an observation about where we are. Here's what I'm watching for in the days ahead. First, the official explanation, whenever it comes. Second, any reporting from credible journalists with sources inside the court or law enforcement. Third, any changes to security posture around the building that might be visible to the public. Fourth, any connection to upcoming decisions or pending cases that might explain the timing. And fifth, how the justices themselves respond, if at all. Do they address it? Do they ignore it? Do they change their public appearances or their willingness to engage outside the court? These details matter because they tell us about the state of the institution and the environment it's operating in. Let me bring this back to the bigger picture. The Supreme Court is not just deciding cases. It's navigating a moment of profound institutional stress. Every decision it makes is scrutinized through political lenses. Every justice's statement is parsed for ideological signals. Every procedural choice becomes a controversy. A midnight clearing, whatever its cause, adds to that stress. It raises questions. It creates uncertainty. It feeds narratives on all sides about the court being under siege, or being compromised, or being unable to function normally. And here's the hard truth. Some of those narratives might be correct. We might be watching an institution struggling to maintain its traditional role in a political environment that no longer respects traditional boundaries. We might be seeing the early signs of institutional breakdown, or we might just be seeing heightened security in response to a specific and manageable threat. We don't know yet, but we should care, because if the Supreme Court loses legitimacy, if it becomes just another political actor rather than a constitutional arbiter, something fundamental breaks in American governance. The court's power rests on public acceptance of its authority, not on armies, not on budgets, on acceptance, on the belief that when the court speaks, it speaks for the Constitution, not for a party or a faction or an ideology. That belief is fragile. It can be damaged by poor decisions, by ethical failures, by the appearance of bias. And it can be damaged by events like a midnight clearing that go unexplained, that feed suspicion and doubt. So yes, we need to know what happened. Not every detail, but enough to maintain confidence that the institution is functioning properly, that it's being protected appropriately, and that there's accountability for how it operates. That's not unreasonable. That's the basic expectation in a democracy. As we wait for more information, remember this. The Supreme Court has weathered crises before. It survived the court-packing fight in the 1930s. It survived massive public opposition to Brown versus Board of Education. It survived Watergate and Bush versus Gore and Citizens United. It's a resilient institution with deep roots in American constitutional tradition. But resilience isn't guaranteed. It has to be earned, maintained, protected. And that requires the court itself to operate with integrity, transparency, where appropriate, and a genuine commitment to its constitutional role. A midnight clearing might be nothing. It might be a reasonable response to a genuine concern that will be explained and understood once we have the facts. Or it might be a sign of something deeper, something more troubling about the pressures facing the institution. We'll know soon enough, but until then, the questions stand. Why was the building cleared? What prompted the decision? What does it tell us about the security environment around the court? And what does it mean for the court's ability to function in the months and years ahead? These aren't idle questions. They go to the heart of how our constitutional system works and whether it can continue to work in an era of intense polarization and institutional stress. Stay informed, demand answers, hold institutions accountable, and remember that in a democracy, secrecy should be the exception, not the rule, especially when it involves an institution as important as the Supreme Court. The building might be locked down tonight, but the questions it raises are very much open, and they deserve serious, thoughtful answers from the people responsible for protecting and operating one of the most important institutions in American democracy.